Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 267, cover dated early September 1990. This is the second appearance of Gambit. The cover caption declares Gambit's in trouble, but there's a storm on the horizon. Well, Storm is way back here, colored in mostly green. So our attention is drawn to the figure of Lian Shen, Dr. Lian Shen, who is in the thrall of the Shadow King and seems to have bested Gambit. And Gambit is a new type, a new character type that has been added to the roster of the X-Men. He's already featuring there in the corner box, even in the time period when the X-Men are scattered all over the world and in search of each other in some cases. And Gambit is a character type of the seducer, the Casanova. And it is interesting then to see on the cover here how it appears like he's been bested by a woman such as Lian Shen. We're going to see that that's not quite the case in the interior of the issue itself, and we'll learn some interesting things about Gambit's early characterization that hasn't entirely carried on into his subsequent characterization past the way he was originally written by Claremont on Claremont's original X-Men run. Now, a few other things to say about this cover before moving on is that it is a collaborative effort, and we've got three signatures here on the cover: Whilce Portacio, Jim Lee, and Bob Wiacek. And the creative distribution of work on this cover is it's a Jim Lee layout, so it's pencil breakdowns, and the finished pencils are by Whilce Portacio. That's why his name comes first, and it is inked by not Scott Williams, surprisingly, but by Bob Wiacek. I like the use of the screen tone here on Lian's tights on the cover, but once we open this one up to the splash page, you'll see that her costume or her clothing has been toned down a bit for the cover. This is a Comics Code approved comic after all, and the covers most particularly have to meet that code. So let's get into this one. Remember, it's the second appearance of Gambit after Uncanny X-Men 266, and it's the first one in which he's drawn by his co-creator Jim Lee. So here's that splash page, and you can see how Lian's costume has been somewhat toned down, as I said, on the cover, because this image, the costuming here on these characters, Lian Shen and the hounds here on leashes, is very much drawn from the BDSM, bondage, domination, sadomasochism culture, subculture, and Claremont playing around with those themes in this particular issue, because Storm has had her life turned upside down by Nanny, who has taken over her life, put Storm in her, or tried to put Storm in her thrall for her own good, for her safety. And then on the other hand, Storm is being chased by the Shadow King, who wants to dominate her and subordinate her, but for malevolent reasons. So Storm is caught in the middle between these two different antagonists, and Gambit is along for the ride and to help her. So the title of the story is Nanny, and this is part 3 of a 3-chapter story that has been running from issue 265, 266, and now the conclusion here, but stretches all the way back to Jim Lee's first work on Uncanny X-Men. That is issue 248. You'll find my review of that on the channel. And it concludes the whole business of Nanny and Storm that, as I said, stretches back to the end of that issue. Now, the credits for this issue come on the last page. There's 23 pages of story, and the credits here are Chris Claremont, writer, so as per usual, but interestingly, art by Homage Studios, including Lee Portacio and Scott Williams, Tom Orzechowski, letterer, Glynis Oliver, colorist, both of those two longtime creators on the title. So what is the division of labor between Lee, Portacio, and Williams? Well, Williams is the inker, of course, but the division of labor between Lee and Portacio is interesting. So Lee is doing the pencil roughs or breakdowns for the whole issue, and on some pages he's doing finished pencils, but on other pages it's Portacio who's doing the finished pencils. This, for example, is Portacio's finished pencils over Jim Lee's breakdown design for the splash page, and the inks on this particular page are by Scott Williams. So you've got everyone working on this. Now, not every page has Whilce Portacio finishing the pencils. I'll point out the ones that he does finish, but it makes for an interesting game you can play if you're a reader who has an eye for different artists, if you can tell the difference between Jim Lee and Whilce Portacio's styles, if you know when Scott Williams is inking a page versus when either Lee himself is inking, which he does on some of these pages, or Portacio is inking, which he does too on some of these pages, because this was a jam issue, and the legend goes that Bob Harris was the one who was in a jam to start with, needed to get an issue of X-Men done in roughly 2 weeks, reached out to Jim Lee, and Jim Lee said, yeah, we can do it. So Lee got on to Portacio, Scott Williams, and the guys pulled 24-hour days, drawing non-stop for 2 weeks in order to get this issue in the can. There's 23 pages here and off to the printers. So really fine work for a comic that was produced in more or less record time, and that involved the guys in their shared studio passing around pages over the course of those that 2 weeks. So Leanne here, this is a really striking splash page, really eye-catching, and again it's a little bit of a take two to remember that this is a comic that's being sold to 10-year-olds as well as college age students and older at the time. And Claremont very, very accomplished at double coding his comics so that the older reader can see and enjoy subtexts that are going over the head of a normal 10-year-old, let's say. So very, very clever on Claremont's part, where he's able to pitch this book at a very, very demographic, stretching in age range from 10 to 30 to 40 years old. And it makes for these comics standing up to rereading decades later, which is what I'm about to do here. So I'll be partly paying attention to the story and partly paying attention to the art and who I think is working on which page versus another page. So the person calling out to Leanne psionically is the Shadow King. And the story begins in a aviation junkyard, so a junkyard for airplanes on the outskirts of Cairo, Illinois. And let's get right into the story now. So these are a couple of pages where we have Jim Lee, pencils to the fore, most particularly on this page, but also there on the 3/4 profile on the Shadow King. You can see very distinctive features of Lee's style, different from the splash page. And Leanne here rather cheekily says to the Shadow King, who is her master, and a good evening to you, O my most dread Shadow Lord and Master. I trust all is well between you and the local authorities. So the Shadow King has been posing as an FBI agent who's dead, but he's possessed his dead body. And he says, I've edited their thoughts so that all they remember of tonight's events is what I wish them to. What of you? So very much the Shadow King, the complete opposite of Professor Xavier, a malevolent telepath who has no moral qualms over interfering with people's minds. So Lian Shen responds, your hounds, Lord, have followed Storm's trail, so that's from the end of the previous issue, to what I believe is her hideout. We're about to move in. And the Shadow King says, do what you will with her accomplice, but Aurora I want alive and unharmed, Dr. Shen. Is that understood? As the Shadow King commands, she says. So the association between the Shadow King and Storm goes all the way back to Uncanny X-Men 118, when the Shadow King had an involvement or an interest in Storm in her youth, and also it's the issue that retells the first meeting of Professor X and the Shadow King, when Professor X apparently kills the Shadow King, but it turned out only to be his human host in Cairo, Egypt. So Lian continues, his slaves most eagerly, as the Shadow King commands, his slaves most eagerly obey. So off go those hounds in pursuit of Storm and Gambit. So really nice work on these pages. Here Lian continues, and this is an intriguing piece, but as the girl is important to you, Lord, so is the boy to me. There's a debt between us I dearly look forward to, taking strip by strip out of his hide. And that refers to the previous issue where Gambit used one of his an intriguing aspect of his mutant powers, which is a charm power, and he charmed Leanne with a promise that he was going to bed her in effect. And interesting here, Claremont playing around with the dark sexual subtexts to suggest that that debt between them, that she sees as a debt, she's going to take out of him. And there's an implication, a dark implication. It's not going to be by consent, let's say, and then she's going to kill him. So a really dark subtext to this, but again, something that would likely go over the head of a 10-year-old reader. Then we pick up with Gambit out on the wing of this DC plane in the junkyard, which Storm has made, Kid Storm has made her home. So Storm is being de-aged by Nanny, and here they're debating about what to do and how to get away. So Gambit says to Storm, I know you can fly on these winds you command, but lifting a whole airplane the same way may be pushing things. But Storm responds, this is my home, I will not leave it. And Gambit says, possessions can be replaced, you're gambling our lives. And that's interesting because Gambit is a risk taker, he's a thief, but he has a very pragmatic attitude to belongings and possessions, and is much more invested in the prime possession anyone has, their lives, including his own. But he has this benevolent, caretaking attitude to young Storm since the previous issue and running throughout this one. Storm says, nothing holds you here, Gambit. If you do not like the odds, then leave. There, feel that. The plane shuddered. It's starting to move. So even though she's in a pre-adolescent age, her body, she still has some access to her mutant powers, and she's accessing them now. In particular, in moments of extreme need, instinct kicks in and taps those mutant powers. So one of the hounds bursts through the windshield of the DC plane just as it's taking off, and Gambit pulls for the very first time an ace of spades. We'll see that many, many times in the future with Gambit, which he uses his powers, his mutant powers, to telekinetically charge up. Eyes flash and a playing card begins to glow, says Claremont's narrative captions, charged, full of energy, in less time than it takes to tell. The sudden scare doesn't shake Storm's concentration, as Leanne had hoped, quite the opposite in fact. But even as Storm's wind surge lifts the ancient derelict DC-6 into the air, Gambit throws that charged card, strikes the hound straight in the face, and out the hound flies, bouncing on the junk of the aviation junkyard, just as that DC-6 is hauling itself off the ground with Storm's powers. So really nice storytelling on this page, kind of thick and dense with line work. This isn't Scott Williams inks on this page. My guess is that it could be Jim Lee who's inking this page. The line work's a little less, it's more scratchier, which is a hallmark of Lee's, but it could also be the case that there's a couple of hands inking this page. But my guess is that Lee is the primary inker on this particular page over his own pencils. So Leanne views the DC plane taking off. Very nice, she thinks. The more I see of those two in action, the more impressed I become. In Storm, my dread dark liege, you may well have found a foe worthy of you. How fortunate she is, but a child. A woman grown, possessed of both full power and the will to wield it, might yet prove to be your match. So Claremont kind of seeding there an ultimate plan that it may be Storm who's the one who ultimately will take out the Shadow King. And at this point, Claremont had a plan to culminate the Shadow King saga, if you will, in issue 300 of the title. So I'm getting a sense that his original plan was for Storm ultimately in her adult form to finally defeat, that is to say, kill the Shadow King. So now this is a little humorous bit where Gambit comes out of the plane with a sweeping brush, and he uses it as a staff. Later on, he will have a bow staff as part of his weaponry, spins it around and knocks this hound off the fuselage of the plane. And that's a really nice anchor image there of him booting, as we have in Tom Orzechowski's sound effect, the hound off the top of the plane, and the hound falls to his death. And Gambit says, rather like a 1980s action hero, happy landing. Shouldn't be so flip though, he says to himself. And this is all great in terms of Claremont's characterization of Gambit. They were human once, or what passes for it, among quality folk. Shadow King twisted him up inside and out, took what was bad, made it worst as it can get. Compared to that death's a mercy. So he's there with a sweeping brush, and he's attacked by another hound who was clinging on to the plane. And that one snaps the brush in two. So the plane's pitching over, he says to himself. Need both hands to hold on, none to spare to toss a card. Perhaps though, I don't need to, because the hound falls off the side of the plane. From the sound of things, it's an old grudge between Storm and this Shadow Lord, he's thinking. Now I'm part of it. Should be fun. So that's an interesting thought of his. Instead of wanting to get out of there, he's up for the adventure. He's up for the challenge. You got control of this crate, Cher, or what? He asks her, and she's smiling there. She does indeed. One good rescue deserves another. I like my scales balanced, she says, because he rescued her in the previous issue. Merci beaucoup. You going to be okay flying this brute? I shall manage, she says. But for how long? As long as necessary. Great top-down angle here as they're flying along the course of the Mississippi River. I suppose until we're safe, says Storm. For forever then? I'm open to suggestions, she says. And here's where Gambit says, follow the big muddy, Cher. Mama Mississippi. She'll take us home. So we're going to have the information now, a little bit of information on Gambit's past. We're going to learn that he's Cajun, but that he is from New Orleans. But before that, there's a little piece of action yet to come. So the lights are off in the plane, and Gambit is examining like the little home that Storm has set up for herself. You can see little details here. There's little house plants in the hold of the plane, and that of course speaks to Storm's long established communication with Mother Earth, but also how when she was resident in the X-Mansion, in her attic bedroom, had houseplants that she would water using her elemental powers, and we get that here in the plane too. And she's got pictures of the X-Men as well. They're like photographs, or how's she gotten her hands on them is the question. But look at the vintage team that this photograph is of. These could be clippings from magazines maybe, but it goes back to the Paul Smith, John Romita Jr. era of the team, where we've got Nightcrawler, Wolverine, Kitty Pryde, Rogue, Storm with a Mohawk, and Colossus there. So a really older version of the team, and Gambit examining the photograph, but also noting the knife that Storm has been keeping in her temporary home of the DC-6 plane. Nasty knife for protection, she says. Bad thing to bluff with, Cher. Hard to use for keeps. And this prompts a memory of Storm's. I know, she says. When I left Cairo, she means Cairo, Egypt this time, I headed straight south along the highway that runs behind the Nile, making my way into the Sudan. How can this be? I'm in America. How can I be remembering Egypt? Because she's been mostly amnesiac in issues running up to this, but she's having memories now. Something drew me south. A force, a voice, calling to my soul. I had no wish to deny. So this is Claremont possibly referencing what he was going to establish and what he was working towards in the Life Death trilogy, in particular issue 198 of Uncanny X-Men. You can find my review of that issue in the back catalogue of the channel's videos. That Storm comes from a long line. She descends from a long line of priestesses who serve a goddess and who all have similar looks. These white hair and blue eyes, and that she in effect has access to sorceress type powers by virtue of that, not just her mutant powers. And again, this is my feeling is that this is Claremont setting things up for a final showdown between Storm and the Shadow King in Uncanny X-Men 300. And also an issue in which he planned for Professor X to die in that particular final battle with the Shadow King. In any case, she goes back to her memory of being offered by a man in a truck a ride, and we can see him here, but not, I discovered, out of the kindness of his heart. I told him no, he would not listen. I tried to run, he hit me, I warned him, he left me no choice. So this is something that Claremont established way back in Uncanny X-Men 169, a review of which you'll find here on the channel, drawn by Paul Smith, where he was writing in darker aspects of Storm's backstory in Africa. And here we have an attempted sexual molestation of young Storm and her instinctual response to kill the guy. And this establishes then that Storm, when she first appeared in all new Giant Size X-Men #1, had killed before. And it was a traumatic one where she was saving herself from this child molester on the drive to Kenya. And Gambit basically responds, got what was coming to him, Cher, not worth your tears. But of course, Storm has a conscience, so much blood, so much surprised disbelief in his eyes as the light left them. Why did he want to hurt me? And that's a deep, deep question. Like, that's a big philosophical type question. Why do people do bad things to each other? And Gambit's response, really pragmatic, happens. Here's Stormy, take a look. Who's she? So he's been looking at those clippings or photos or whatever they are, and it's adult Storm, of course. We recognize her back in the Mohawk days, back in those Paul Smith, John Romita Jr. days on the title. Blue eyes, silver hair, answer seems obvious. And Storm says, it's a photograph, Gambit, of a grown-up. Interesting puzzler, eh? He responds, any relatives you don't know about? But then the cockpit is flooded with light, and we've got Nanny's ship hovering above them. So now, action again. Say the word, Nanny says, Orphan-Maker. Patience, my Orphan-Maker. She responds to him, your moment will come when Nanny's work is done. So Nanny now projects a holographic image of herself into the cockpit of the DC-6. There you are, naughty, wayward girl. Have you any idea of the trouble you've caused, Aurora? You should be ashamed. And young Storm is cowed a little. Do not be cross, Nanny, please. I'm so sorry. Because Nanny's got this psychological type hold over Storm, and now we get a flashback. And the way you can always tell a flashback in a 70s, 80s, and 90s Marvel comic is the curved edge of the corners of the borders of panels. You see it there and there and there. So now we're having the flashback, and this goes all the way back to the last pages of Uncanny X-Men 248, like I said before, drawn by Jim Lee, his first work on this particular title, Uncanny X-Men. Terror sparks memory, one reality incinerating another. Same ship, Australian skies, sharing the figure from the photo. Really nice transition there by Claremont. And so here we are in the past, and I'll deal with the story first, and then I'll talk a little bit about the art on this page, because this is an interesting page art-wise. So this is all flashback until this point here. A mannequin sees Storm, dressed like me, and it turns out to be a S.H.I.E.L.D. life model decoy, and this is Nanny's plan here. So now we're learning what happened at the end of 248. Nanny contacts Havoc, who's still partly in her control on the ground. Havoc, she communicates to him, Storm is in danger. Only you can hear my voice. Only you can save her. So he lets rip with his plasma bolt. Dear sweet lad, so obedient, says Nanny in the present. His plasma blast looks terribly impressive. But thanks to my... Sorry, this is in the past. She's on board the ship. But thanks to my influence, only a fraction of its true might. Easily deflected by my shields. Under cover of the energy flare, I'll eject the decoy ship and my Storm LMD, life model decoy, to a fiery crash. The X-Men will find the body and assume the worst, leaving me a free hand with the real thing. And that's the end of Uncanny X-Men 248, where Havoc thought he'd killed Storm and they found the body, but now it's revealed it was a S.H.I.E.L.D. LMD. And here we are in the present again. Don't make this part any harder, pet, says Nanny. Remember, she's just a hologram projected into the cockpit. Storm is traumatized here, and Gambit's thinking on his feet. Can't deal with this hologram of Nanny with her pet boy breathing down my neck. So we can see Orphan-Maker ready to leap onto the ship. Who knows? Take care of him. Maybe she'll go away in the bargain. Worth a try. So he throws another charged card at Orphan-Maker, say Bonne Nuit, Gracie, and bam, Orphan-Maker's blasted back in to Nanny's ship. And that shocks Nanny. She's horrified. Murdering brute, she says. He's only a baby. So that's her attitude to all these adults. And she flies off. And Storm here, traumatized. Gambit tries to get her to calm down. Need your big win. Plane can't fly without it. Nothing more to be scared of. Big bad boogie eggs being chased away. She's no match for you. What you doing letting her get away with this, eh? You fought back against that Shadow King. You can do the same here. Don't fold, Stormy. And Gambit is such a smooth talker. He knows just the things to say to people to get them to do what he wants them to do. And Storm pulls out of her breakdown and pulls the DC-6 up just at the last moment before it crashes. Once and for all, she says to him, do not call me that. She doesn't like being called Stormy. Really great sequence, great action sequence there. But back to this double page spread. This is an intriguing one because what they did at Homage Studios was, obviously this is 2 pages that have been taped together so that we get the panel here crossing the border of the 2 pages, and the same here as well. But what they did was they cut the double page spread in half. So we can't see the cut here because it's covered in black in the gutters between these panels and these in the bottom tier. And it was, my guess is, and the reason they did that was in order to speed up the inking process. Because think about it, you've got a double page spread. You can only have one person working on that. That's going to take longer than if you could have 2 people working on the same material. And the way to do that was to cut it in half along the horizontal here. And Scott Williams, it's my guess, is the inker for the top tier because the ink line is very, very confident. And the bottom tier is scratchier, which is the hallmark of Jim Lee's style. At the time, you can see it very much in his when he's inking himself on Punisher War Journal. So my guess is Scott Williams is the inker for the top tier and Jim Lee inking his own pencils on the bottom tier. Really, really interesting stuff. And again, just intriguing, you know, what they did in order to turn this 23-page issue around in 2 weeks. And Bob Harris very, very pleased with the results. Later, Storm, it's a nightmare. And she's being pursued by Orphan-Maker, this huge figure of Orphan-Maker here. And he grabs her, and then she finds herself being put into one of these nanny suits. And Orphan-Maker saying to her, there is so great a need, Storm, such terrible danger, that she should armor up with all this protection. That's the spirit. Nanny's babes must be the happiest of lambs, and whatever Nanny wants, she always gets. And I find this so intriguing again. I mentioned it at the beginning of the video, like the thematic here. You've got Storm, she's being regressed to a prepubescent age. Nanny's doing it out of some, misguided impulse to protect young mutants. And from the Shadow King, in fact, that's also something that emerges, that it's the Shadow King that she wants to protect Storm and other mutants from. And it's all part of this build-up to issue 300. And then on the other hand, there's the Shadow King, who is a malevolent, domineering, subjugating, subordinating, wicked character. So is this the answer? Well, you know, the heroics of the X-Men? No. The answer is to grow up and deal with like the dark people that there are in the world. And that's like the thematic that's being explored in this particular issue. So her nightmare, it turns out, is interrupted by Gambit's arrival here, but her response is a shocked one. Now, this particular page and sequence is not the most successful of Jim Lee's layouts in storytelling wise for this particular issue. So Storm wakes up and she throws that knife that was established earlier that she carries for protection. More dreaming than awake, she responds with a shriek that tears her voice raw and a speed that defies description. Even as the blade leaves her hand, she realizes her mistake, draws desperate breath for a warning she knows will come too late. She needn't have worried. And Gambit, with a swipe, grabs the knife before it hits him. But this is too slow in the storytelling. She's thrown the knife. It's supposed to be moving with a speed that defies description. It should already be in Gambit's head or caught by him. But instead we have this intruding panel which slows everything down, in particular with Claremont's dialogue here. And the way to solve this, I was thinking about it before making the video, is put this panel here, put this here, put this one in the middle and this one third. Then you have her waking up from the dream, you've got the action of her throwing the knife, you've the knife approaching Gambit, pair back on the third person narration and have Gambit catch the knife there. If that sequence had been the sequence on the page, screaming Storm, throwing the knife approaching Gambit's head and him catching it, I don't think Claremont would have overwritten it with the third person narration. He could have let the art speak for itself. I like these two panels here, the aftermath, where Storm here is delighted that Gambit's caught it and he's just so nonchalant. You know, he did. Oh yeah, this is another part of it as well. He's smoking his cigarette there. He drops it, he lets it drop from his hand to catch the knife, but then he manages also to catch the cigarette again and is still puffing away on his smoke, so he doesn't even lose his cigarette. I like that. That's good characterization. So now we have a little heart-to-heart here. Storm, you know, in terms of what he says, or she says here, only a nightmare. Wait a minute, it's him saying that. Hate to see something serious, he says to her. Everybody wants me, Gambit, she responds. And he says, that's the truth. Why can they not simply leave me alone, she asks. I just want to live my life. Don't we all, he says? Is it so much to ask? In your case, you have value, Storm, because of who you are, what you've done, what you can do, and you have enemies. Hard place to be, harder road to walk. Survive both better, I bet on a full stomach. Again, Gambit, as ever, always pragmatic. Got you some new frocks. He's been out shopping for her. So you get changed, we go eat, figure some next moves. And now we get a really nice page coming up here. You know, you could just leave it at that. You could continue with the action, but Claremont, no. He wants this page where we've got this nice little domestic scene. Gambit has gone to one of his old friends in New Orleans. What's her name here again? Is her name given at all? I'm not sure. Anyway, Storm is saying here that she's full up, her belly's bigger after the gumbo. Bound to happen, Cher, says Gambit. All the food you stuffed into you. I knew I was hungry, she stops. Using power takes a lot out of you. Now that's interesting as well. As a prepubescent, using the power to fly the DC-6 plane all the way down the Mississippi to New Orleans took a lot out of her. And the woman says, growing girl like you, child, needs her proper eating. Had my gumbo, time now to finish things off with a bowl of my special bread pudding. And Storm says, I cannot, I'll burst. Trust me, you'll do fine. Just a taste is all I ask. And then she ate it all. And didn't burst, says Gambit. Guess you had room after all. It was delicious. The heck with flying ever again, though. I doubt I can even walk. So nice little sequence there, like a human sequence. And that's the kind of thing that long-time readers of the X-Men loved and really built up, was the grounds for building up great affection between readers and the characters in the X-Men mythos. You don't get that so much in the present day, but Claremont was a master at it and enjoyed it. And now we get another one of these Claremont tropes as well. Something that he's really good at is giving like a capsule kind of presentation of any location anywhere in the world. So Gambit introduces Storm to the French Quarter of New Orleans. The sights and sounds and smells and tastes, restaurants, honky-tonks, jazz clubs, and people from North Rampart to the River Canal to Esplanade, before moving outwards to the business district beyond, as modern in its way as the old city tries to remain timeless. And these are the kinds of captions that Fabian Nicier's on Adjectiveless X-Men tried to imitate in order to give a little flavour of Claremont on his particular run. And sometimes he did well and sometimes not as well, but Claremont is the master of it. So you get this like collage of scenes and images from New Orleans in the background behind young Storm and Gambit there, who's had a little shave as well, so he's clean shaven for once. And now they get to work. They hit bad guys only, stripping criminals of their ill-gotten gains and returning them to those who need it most, ranging along the Gulf states from the Florida Panhandle to South Texas, merrily looting the looters, Part Lone Ranger, mostly Robin Hood, causing crooks no end of grief, cops and common folk an equal measure of delight. So another really cool page. So we see them here emptying a safe. We see them here enjoying the seafood, ranging along the Gulf states as they move from Florida to South Texas. A great anchor image here of them as well. And Claremont returned to it a couple of years ago with a 5-issue Gambit miniseries. You can find my reviews of that on the channel. These particular weeks or even month or two in the life of D.H. Storm and Gambit. And it's worth a read because obviously he was attracted to the possibilities there were in this kind of odd couple, this unlikely matchup of young girl and Cajun thief. Until one fine evening, we're back to the climax of the story. I like the layouts on this particular page, these tall vertical panels, no border on this particular one, no border on the other one as well, and a great kind of, what would I say, like worm's eye perspective on this one, where we're looking up at Storm as she's flying up after Orphan-Maker. We're looking at the bottom of Nanny's ship, and we're looking at Gambit caught up there with these particular tentacles. So Gambit is being chased by Orphan-Maker, and Storm follows him. And when does it take until one fine evening? It's Mardi Gras. So it's Mardi Gras. It's in late winter that this aspect of the story is taking place. All Jim Lee pencils on these pages, and my guess is that this one is inked by Jim Lee, but this page inked by Scott Williams. So let's continue, because we're going to get a few more Whilce Portacio finished pages, and my guess is that it is these two pages here are finished by Portacio, in particular this page. So you can see the anatomy on adult Storm here as she's remembering. You see the curved borders of this particular panel. You see this particular anatomy on Storm, very, very Whilce Portacio like. So obviously working up from loose Jim Lee breakdowns for this page, and my guess is that this page too is by Portacio. Something about that particular face is very Portacio-esque, including the eyelashes and the hint of the eyelid as well, very like Portacio. But in terms of the story, young Storm flies into Nanny's ship, and she sees Orphan-Maker carrying, kind of humorously, Gambit upside down there, and Gambit starts to use his charm on Nanny. We don't know what Nanny is. She appears to be some kind of robot, but we're not entirely 100% sure of whether she's completely a sentient robot or what. Or is there something biological within her? At the time, like Nanny says to Gambit when he's upside down, question is, whatever are we to do with you? And Gambit responds, more than a few they'd line up to do the worst. But I figure you're a kinder, gentler soul, truly caring lady you are. And Nanny's charmed, how nice. Why you don't seem anywhere near so. But Orphan-Maker intrudes. Shut up, you, he says. Don't you see, Nanny? He was trying to trick you, using sweet words to get you to do what he wants. And that's an aspect of Gambit, his characterization, a power of his, this charm power that hasn't really gotten as used since Claremont left the character. It's kind of been forgotten about, and I'd like to see it return. I'd like to see that used more in Gambit's characterization. An intriguing power, says Nanny, especially if we can turn it to our own uses. Because of course, her whole angle is charming and persuading adult mutants to be de-aged so that she can protect them, as I said earlier, from the Shadow King. Nice try, thinks Storm. Up to me alone now, but what can I do? Remember the nightmare she had? Some element in this ship works against my power. Ever since I came aboard, I've not been able to generate the smallest wind or lightning, so she's going to have to do what she does without access to her powers. And then she stumbles on this technological cocoon. I know this place, she thinks to herself. That is the awful box Nanny used to change me. And now more memories with the curved panel or corners of the borders of the panel. So she remembers being pushed into the machine and de-aged. And Nanny saying, by regressing you to childhood, past the point where your mutant powers came into being and stripping you of your memories along the way, I can reshape character and belief so that my cause becomes yours. Won't that be wonderful? And Storm protests all the way. No, it will not be bound. It will not be enslaved. Whatever the cost, I shall be free. And young Storm in the present is forced to her knees, and she's got her head in her hands, and we're wondering, is she broken by this? Is she going to be able to triumph and make good on these words? And this is very Portacio style, like the loose sketching here of either a marker. I think this is a marker, a thick marker, very distinctive of his style, and a character outside the borders of panels, out in the gutter, so to speak. Something that he would use on X Factor and his run on Uncanny X-Men as well. And now we're back to Jim Lee pencils, and here's Orphan-Maker coming with a big gun, and he's looking for Storm. Better come out wherever you are. And just like in her dream, she's gone into one of those suits ever since. She's thinking back again, being in that cocoon. It was like when I was a child, buried in the rubble of my parents' bombed out home. Ever since, I've been terrified of enclosed spaces, of being trapped. That's like this old trauma of Storm's, her claustrophobia. That claustrophobia gave me the berserker strength I needed to overload Nanny's systems and blast me loose. So that's why Storm was free. But she had stripped me of everything that happened afterwards. So she was amnesiac. So that I ended up reliving my life as a thief in Cairo. Different details, same essence. So Cairo, Illinois, rather than Cairo, Egypt. Now though, I'm once more myself in mind, if not in body. So adult Storm's mind is back. In my nightmare, donning this suit of armor placed me irrevocably under Nanny's influence. But she gets into it again. But if Gambit is to be freed, I see no other way. So she pulls the helmet over her head. And now we get a scene that is reminiscent of James Cameron's Aliens, the third act of James Cameron's Aliens. So Storm boots open the door into the, some particular compartment of Nanny's ship. Nanny, she exclaims, get away from him, you murdering old witch. And for me, this recalls and echoes that line in the third act of James Cameron's Aliens, when Sigourney Weaver's character Ellen Ripley dons that big suit that is used for moving things around. It's like a kind of like a trying to think of a word for it. It's a mechanical suit for unloading cargo or moving cargo around a ship or whatever. And so Storm here, when she says, get away from him, you murdering old witch, it echoes that line of Ripley's when she emerges in the suit to face the alien queen and says, get away from her, you bitch. And I think Claremont is deliberately echoing that scene here. And Orphan-Maker thinks that Storm isn't going to be effective against him. Nice shooting, he says, but my armor's a lot tougher than your guns. Because boys are meant to be bigger and stronger, you can't hurt me a bit. On the other hand, he starts firing off at her. But Nanny says, Peter, Storm, stop this at once. No shooting inside the ship. Control and power. Massive systems disruptions. You'll make us crash. But Orphan-Maker isn't going to stop. And Storm sends off a shot right behind him that she wasn't aiming at him. She wanted to catch the machinery behind him. So he's caught from behind. You missed me, he says. That was my intent. So he's knocked out. And we've come to the end of the story. Big anchor image here of Storm punching out Orphan-Maker. And she thinks here, punch ruptured every circuit in my suit, but it was worth it. As she exits the suit. And Nanny says, wretched girl. And Gambit strung up for transformation into a de-aged version of himself. But he's got his own power there. And he slips an ace of spades again. He must have loads of them. must have a deck of ace of spades, slips it down from the sleeve of his trench coat into his hand, kinetically charges it, and sends it right to explode behind Nanny. And then the ship does crash into the Louisiana swamp, splams into the swamp water, and the ones to emerge on this last page are Gambit and Storm. So this page, my feeling is that it is that some of the inking could be by Whilce Portacio on this page, and that this page is finished pencils by Portacio. That face on Storm there, the way her nose and eyes and those eyelids and eyelashes are rendered, is distinctive of Portacio, not Jim Lee. So Gambit has pulled Storm from Nanny's ship and they're safe. Thank you for the rescue, says Storm. So, you know, they've each rescued the other twice at this count. Just doing what comes natural, he says to her, same as you. And Storm was concerned for Nanny and Orphan-Maker, but Gambit is of the opinion they're done for. We work pretty well together, he says to Storm. Be ashamed to break up the team just when we're getting started. I appreciate the sentiment, she says, but I'm afraid there is more to this than just you and I. And Gambit now twigs and he says, you're talking different. Voice sounds older. It is, I am, she responds. No longer quite the girl you befriended. And here we go. Tell me, Gambit, have you ever heard of a band of mutant heroes called the X-Men? So that's it now. Now we're moving towards the X-Men getting back together. All of the different characters scattered around the world searching for each other. You've got Wolverine and Psylocke with Jubilee searching for the X-Men. You've got Banshee and Forge searching for the X-Men. You've got now Storm and Gambit searching for the X-Men. They're going to come together shortly. But next up, Madripoor Nights, which was a really surprising story that showed the very first meeting of Logan and Captain America. And there you go. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on what is a very intriguing issue of Uncanny X-Men, the second appearance of Gambit, and one where his co-creator Jim Lee gets to draw him and does a really fine job on the character, and we learn more about Gambit and his powers and a little bit about his mysterious background. And we have such an interesting kind of object in terms of the collaboration of the Homage Studios artists Jim Lee, Whilce Portacio and Scott Williams on this issue. Let me know your thoughts on it in the comments section to the video. If you enjoyed my review and commentary, please like the video on YouTube. It really does help the channel. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.